The millionaire's son lay motionless on the cold marble floor, eyes shut tight, body rigid with shock. Elena knelt beside him, her hands trembling violently as she held something small, dark, and moving in her palm. "Elena, what did you do?" The butler's voice cracked with terror, his feet frozen to the floor. Footsteps exploded through the mansion, heavy, frantic, furious. Mr. Daniel Corleone burst into the room, his face drained of all color. The man whose fortune could buy government stood paralyzed, staring at his motionless son. "What happened to my son?" he roared, his voice splitting the air like thunder. Elena looked up at him, tears streaming down her face, her lips trembling. "I didn't hurt him, sir," she whispered. "I swear, I was only trying to help." "Help?" Daniel's voice went dangerously low. "You touched my son? You went near him without my permission?" Slowly, so slowly, Elena opened her palm. Inside sat something no one had ever seen before, something strange, dark, wet. It glistened under the chandelier light, twitching slightly as if it were alive. Everyone in the room took an involuntary step backward. The air turned thick, suffocating, heavy with dread. Then, a sound, soft, fragile, impossible. "Dad?" It came from the boy, the same boy who had been born deaf, the same boy who had never spoken a single word in his entire life. For a heartbeat, no one moved, not even Daniel. And that was when he realized the maid had just done the impossible. "Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome back to Unbroken Truths, where we share stories that don't just entertain, they transform. I'm so glad you're here with me today. Quick question. Where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments. I love seeing our global family come together. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one. Trust me, what you're about to witness will shake you to your core and remind you that sometimes the greatest miracles come from the most unexpected places. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The Corleone mansion stood like a fortress on the hill, gleaming white columns, endless gardens, fountains that sang day and night. From the outside, it looked like paradise, but inside, silence lived in every corner like an unwelcome guest. Daniel Corleone was a man who built empires, steel, technology, real estate. His name opened doors across continents. But the one door he couldn't open was the one to his son's world, a world trapped in silence. His son Ethan had been born deaf. No amount of money had changed that. Daniel had flown him to specialists in Switzerland, Germany, Japan. He'd paid for experimental treatments that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Each time, he returned home with the same crushing weight, and hope turned to ash. Ethan was 10 years old now, a beautiful boy with curious eyes and a smile that rarely appeared. He moved through the mansion like a ghost, arranging his toys in perfect lines, watching the world through glass windows he could never truly hear. Sometimes Daniel would stand at his son's bedroom door, watching him sleep, wondering what dreams sounded like to a child who'd never heard a lullaby. The guilt ate at him slowly, like rust on iron. He blamed himself. Maybe he'd worked too much during the pregnancy. Maybe he'd missed some sign, some warning. The doctors said it wasn't his fault, but fathers don't listen to doctors when it comes to guilt. Elena arrived at the mansion on a Tuesday morning in March. She was 26, with deep brown eyes that had seen too much sorrow for someone so young. Shivar wore a simple dress, her hair pulled back neatly, her hands calloused from years of hard work. She needed this job desperately because her mother's medical bills were drowning her, pulling her under a little more each month. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, had looked her up and down with suspicious eyes. "We need someone who follows rules. Mr. Corleone doesn't tolerate mistakes." "I understand," Elena had said quietly. "I won't let you down." What Mrs. Chen didn't know, what Elena never spoke about, was the ghost that followed her everywhere. His name had been Samuel, her little brother. Samuel had been born hearing, but at age 4, a severe infection stole that gift away. Elena remembered the day the silence came, how her brother's laughter just stopped, how he'd bang on his ears, crying, confused why the world had gone dark and quiet. Their family couldn't afford the surgery. The doctors had been clear, $20,000 or nothing. Her mother had begged, borrowed, sold everything. It wasn't enough. Samuel died 2 years later from complications. He was 6 years old. Elena had made a promise at his grave, whispering through tears, If I ever meet another child suffering like you did, I won't look away. I won't let money decide if they deserve help. She'd kept that promise buried in her heart for 8 years, until she met Ethan. The first time she saw him, he was sitting on the grand staircase, lining up toy cars by color. Red, blue, yellow, green. Perfect order. Perfect silence. Elena had been carrying fresh linens when she passed. She paused, watching him. Something in the way he moved so carefully, so isolated, made her chest tighten. He didn't look up when she walked by, didn't react to her footsteps. That's when she knew. Over the following days, Elena began leaving small gifts on the stairs where Ethan played. A folded origami crane, a smooth river stone she'd found in the garden, a piece of chocolate wrapped in silver paper. At first, nothing. Ethan would glance at them, then ignore them. But slowly, something shifted. One morning, the chocolate was gone. The crane sat beside his toy cars, carefully positioned. Elena smiled to herself as she dusted nearby. The next week, when she cleaned the windows near his playroom, Ethan stood closer, watching her reflection in the glass. She turned and waved. His small hand lifted and waved back. It was the smallest gesture, but to Elena, it was everything. Mrs. Chen didn't approve. "You're getting too close to the boy," she warned one evening as Elena scrubbed the kitchen floor. "Mr. Corleone doesn't like the staff bonding with his son. Keep your distance." Elena nodded, but her heart disagreed. She'd seen the loneliness in Ethan's eyes, the same loneliness Samuel had carried. She couldn't turn away. One afternoon, while Elena was polishing the hallway mirror, Ethan appeared beside her. He tugged her sleeve gently, then pointed to his chest and made a simple gesture, the sign for friend. Elena's eyes filled with tears. She knelt down, looked him in the eye, and signed back, "Yes, friends." From that day forward, they were inseparable during her shifts. She taught him new signs. He taught her how to see joy in silent moments, a butterfly landing on a flower, the way sunlight danced on water. But Elena began noticing something else. Ethan touched his ear constantly, wincing, scratching. Sometimes his eyes watered, and he'd press his palm against the side of his head as if trying to push away pain. One morning in the garden, she knelt beside him and gently tilted his head. The sunlight caught his ear at just the right angle. Deep inside, she saw it. Something dark, glistening, moving slightly like it was alive. Her breath caught. Her heart pounded. She'd seen infections before, but this looked different. Wrong. "Does it hurt?" she signed. Ethan nodded, his small face twisted in discomfort. Elena's mind raced. Should she tell Mr. Corleone? Would he even listen to her? The staff had whispered about how he'd fired people for far less than getting involved with his son's care. But as she looked into Ethan's eyes so much like Samuel's, she knew she couldn't stay silent this time. That night, Elena lay awake in her small room behind the laundry area, staring at the ceiling. Her brother's face haunted her. The way he'd looked at her in those final days, trying to communicate something he couldn't say. She whispered into the darkness, "Samuel, what do I do?" The answer came not in words, but in her heart. She had to try. The next morning arrived heavy with tension. Elena couldn't name. She woke before dawn, her stomach knotted with anxiety. Something felt different, like the air itself was holding its breath. She dressed quickly, tying her hair back with trembling fingers, and made her way through the mansion's quiet corridors. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, casting long shadows across the marble floors. As she passed the grand foyer, she heard it crying soft, muffled, desperate. Elena's feet moved before her mind could catch up. She followed the sound to Ethan's playroom. The door was cracked open, golden morning light spilling through. Inside, Ethan sat curled on the floor, both hands pressed against his right ear, rocking back and forth. His face was twisted in agony, tears streaming down his cheeks. His toy cars lay scattered around him, the perfect order destroyed. "Ethan!" Elena rushed in, dropping to her knees beside him. He looked up at her with eyes full of pain and fear. His hands moved frantically, signing the same thing over and over. "Hurts, hurts, hurts." Elena's heart shattered. She gently took his hands in hers, trying to calm him. "Let me see," she signed. "Please, let me help." Ethan hesitated, his whole body trembling. Then slowly, painfully, he tilted his head toward her. Elena leaned closer, using the morning light to see inside his ear. What she saw made her blood run cold. The dark thing she'd glimpsed before was larger now. It actually moved deeper into his ear canal, as if trying to hide from the light. It was sleek, segmented, alive, and around it the skin was red, inflamed, infected. "Oh God," Elena whispered, her hands shaking. This wasn't just debris. This was something that had been living inside Ethan's ear, maybe for years, blocking sound, causing pain, and every doctor who'd examined him had somehow missed it. Or worse, had they? Elena's mind flashed to something Mrs. Chen had mentioned once, how Mr. Corleone paid a private medical team hundreds of thousands annually to manage Ethan's condition, how they did surgery after surgery, treatment after treatment, but nothing ever changed. What if they wanted nothing to change? The thought made her sick. Ethan whimpered, pulling her back to the moment. His eyes pleaded with her, not just for relief from pain, but for someone to finally see him, to help when everyone else had failed. Elena made a decision that would change everything. "I'm going to get it out," she signed, her jaw set with determination. Ethan's eyes widened. He signed back frantically. "No doctors. Please, they hurt me." "Not doctors," Elena signed. "Me. Just me. Do you trust me?" For a long moment, Ethan stared at her. Then slowly, he nodded. Elena reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small silver safety pin she used to fix torn hems. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold it steady. "This might feel strange," she signed with one hand. "But I'll be gentle, I promise." She took a deep breath, said a silent prayer, and carefully brought the pin closer to Ethan's ear. The thing inside seemed to sense the intrusion. It twitched, retreating deeper. Elena's pulse raced. Sweat beaded on her forehead. With the steadiest hand she could manage, she angled the pin, trying to hook the creature without pushing it further in. "Just a little more," she whispered. Suddenly, the playroom door flew open. "What in God's name are you doing?" Daniel Corleone stood in the doorway, his face a mixture of shock and fury. Behind him stood Mrs. Chen and the butler, their expressions horrified. Elena froze, the pin still hovering near Ethan's ear. "Step away from my son!" Daniel's voice was thunder. "Now!" "Sir, please," Elena tried to explain, but Daniel was already storming toward her. "You're fired. Get your hands off him." "Mr. Corleone, there's something in his ear." Elena's voice cracked with desperation. "Something alive! I can see it! You're insane!" Daniel grabbed her arm, yanking her away from Ethan. The sudden movement caused Elena's hand to jerk. The pin grazed Ethan's ear canal, not enough to hurt him, but enough to disturb the creature inside. And then everything happened at once. The thing, dark, segmented, about the size of a large beetle, suddenly shot out of Ethan's ear as if expelled. It landed on the floor with a wet plop, writhing, its legs scrambling. Everyone in the room screamed. Ethan clutched his ear, gasping not in pain, but in shock. And then a sound escaped his lips. What? The room went dead silent. Daniel's grip on Elena's arm loosened. His face went white. "What did you just say?" he whispered to his son. Ethan looked around, confused, overwhelmed. His eyes were wide with wonder and terror. He covered his ears with both hands, then pulled them away, then covered them again. "Too loud," he whispered, his voice rough and uncertain. "Everything too loud." The creature on the floor continued writhing. Mrs. Chen stumbled backward, her hand over her mouth. The butler stood frozen, unable to process what he was witnessing. Daniel dropped to his knees in front of his son. "Ethan?" His voice shook. Can you hear me?" Ethan looked directly at his father. Tears streamed down his face. "Dad," he said, the word clumsy and beautiful. "Is that your voice?" Daniel's face crumpled. For the first time in perhaps decades, tears filled his eyes. "Yes," he choked out. "Yes, son, that's my voice." Father and son stared at each other, both crying, both end by the impossible moment between them. Then Daniel's expression changed. The softness vanished, replaced by confusion and anger. He turned to Elena, who stood against the wall, trembling. "What was that thing?" he demanded. "I don't know, sir," Elena said quietly, "but it was blocking his ear. I think it's been there a long time." Daniel looked down at the creature, which had finally stopped moving, his face twisted with disgust and horror. "Call the hospital," he said to the butler, his voice hollow. "Tell them to send an ambulance, and call Dr. Morrison. I want answers. Now." The butler nodded and rushed out. Daniel stood, running his hands through his hair, trying to process everything. "How did you—" he started, looking at Elena. "How did you know?" "I saw him in pain," Elena said simply. Before Daniel could respond, Ethan spoke again, his voice gaining strength. "She helped me, Dad. Elena helped me. Daniel's jaw clenched. He looked at Alina with an expression she couldn't read, gratitude mixed with suspicion, wonder mixed with fear. "Everyone out," he said quietly. "Except you." He pointed at Elena. "You stay." Mrs. Chen and the butler quickly left, closing the door behind them. Daniel picked up the dead creature using a tissue, his face pale with revulsion. 10 years, he whispered. 10 years of specialists, surgeries, treatments, and this thing was sitting in his ear the entire time? Elena said nothing. The question was rhetorical, filled with a father's anguish. Ethan stood and walked to Elena, wrapping his small arms around her waist. "Thank you," he whispered, the words still strange and new on his tongue. Elena hugged him back, her eyes meeting Daniel's over the boy's head. For the first time, Daniel Corleone looked truly vulnerable and lost. "I need to understand what just happened," he said quietly, "and I need to know if my son is safe." "He's safe," Elena said firmly. "But there's something wrong, Mr. Corleone. Something very wrong. No doctor should have missed this, not for 10 years. Daniel's eyes darkened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Elena took a breath, "that maybe they didn't miss it. Maybe they ignored it." The words hung in the air like a blade. And in that moment, Daniel Corleone realized he was about to uncover a truth that would destroy everything he thought he knew. If you're feeling what I'm feeling right now, drop a comment below and tell me, would you have had the courage to do what Elena did? Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is act when everyone else looks away. Don't forget to subscribe to Unbroken Truths so you never miss these powerful moments. The ambulance arrived within 20 minutes, sirens wailing through the quiet morning. Paramedics rushed into the mansion, their equipment clattering against the marble floors. They found Ethan sitting calmly on the sofa, Elena beside him, while Daniel paced like a caged lion. "He can hear," Daniel said before they could ask questions. "My son can hear. After 10 years of silence, he can suddenly hear." The lead paramedic, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, looked skeptical. "Sir, that's not medically possible without intervention." "Test him then," Daniel interrupted, his voice sharp. "Test him right now." She did, snapping her fingers behind Ethan's head, clapping softly, speaking his name from different distances. Each time, Ethan turned toward the sound, his face a mixture of wonder and fear. "My God," the paramedic whispered, "he really can hear." Daniel thrust a sealed plastic bag toward her, the creature inside, dead but still horrifying to look at. "This came out of his ear. I want it analyzed. I want to know what it is, how long it's been there, and how every specialist I hired missed it." The paramedic's face went pale as she examined it. I've never seen anything like this. We need to get him to the hospital immediately." St. Mary's Hospital was the most expensive medical facility in the state. Daniel had donated millions to build their pediatric wing. The staff knew him by name and treated him like royalty. Today, he walked through those doors like a man preparing for war. Ethan was taken immediately to examination rooms. Elena tried to follow, but a nurse stopped her. "Family only." "She comes with us," Daniel said firmly, surprising everyone, including Elena. "She's the one who discovered this. She stays." The medical team ran tests for hours. MRI scans, hearing tests, blood work. Ethan's ear was examined by 3 different specialists, each looking more confused than the last. Elena sat in the waiting area, watching through glass windows as doctors huddled, whispering urgently, pointing at charts. Daniel stood among them, his arms crossed, his face carved from stone. Finally, Dr. Richard Morrison arrived as the chief specialist who'd been treating Ethan for 8 years. He was a tall man with silver hair, expensive suit, and a smile that had reassured hundreds of wealthy families. That smile disappeared when Daniel cornered him in the hallway. 8 years, Richard." Daniel's voice was dangerously quiet. 8 years you've been treating my son. You told me his condition was permanent. You told me his ear structure was malformed. You performed 2 surgeries, prescribed medication, run tests every 6 months. Dr. Morrison adjusted his glasses nervously. "Daniel, the condition was complex. There was a parasite in his ear." Daniel's voice rose, echoing through the corridor. "A living creature blocking his hearing. How did you miss that?" The scans should have caught it." "Should have." Daniel stepped closer. "I paid you $400,000 a year for 8 years. And you're telling me you should have caught it?" Dr. Morrison's face flushed red. Daniel, please, let's discuss this privately. No. Daniel pulled out his phone. We're discussing it with lawyers and the medical board and every journalist who will listen. You don't understand the complexity. I understand perfectly. Daniel cut him off, his eyes blazing. I understand that my son suffered for a decade while you collected checks. I understand that a maid with no medical training did in 5 minutes what you couldn't do in 8 years. Elena watched from down the hall, her heart pounding. She'd never seen Daniel like this, raw, furious, protective. Dr. Morrison noticed her and his eyes narrowed. That woman had no right to touch your son. She could have caused permanent damage. She's not qualified. She cured him, Daniel shouted, while you kept him sick. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and damning. Dr. Morrison's face went from red to white. That's a serious allegation, Daniel. You're implying— I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Daniel's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. My son is healed because someone finally gave a damn, and I'm going to find out why you didn't. That evening, after Ethan was admitted for overnight observation, Daniel found Elena sitting alone in the hospital cafeteria. She was staring at a cup of cold coffee, her mind far away. He sat down across from her without asking. For a long moment, neither spoke. My brother died because we couldn't afford treatment, Elena said quietly, not looking at him. Samuel, he was 6 years old, deaf from an infection, just like Ethan. The doctors said surgery would fix it, but we didn't have $20,000. Daniel listened, his jaw tight. We tried everything, Elena continued, her voice thick with old grief. My mother sold her jewelry. I quit school to work. We begged churches, charities, but it wasn't enough. She finally looked up at him, tears glistening in her eyes. Samuel died because money decided his life wasn't worth saving. I'm sorry, Daniel said, and he meant it. When I saw Ethan in pain, Elena whispered, I saw Samuel, and I couldn't just watch again. I couldn't let another child suffer when I could help. Daniel's throat tightened. You risked your job. You could have hurt him. You could have made things worse. I know, Elena nodded, but doing nothing felt worse. They sat in silence again, the weight of the day settling over him like fog. The creature they found, Daniel finally said. The lab is analyzing it now. They think it's some kind of parasitic insect. Rare, nearly impossible to detect without direct visual examination. He paused. Every scan we did, MRI, CT, everything somehow missed it. How is that possible? Elena asked. Daniel's face darkened. That's what I intend to find out. Hey, Unbroken Truth's family, real quick. I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand up against people in power to do what's right? Drop your story in the comments. Your experience might inspire someone else who's facing a similar choice right now. Later that night, Elena was allowed to see Ethan. He was in a private room, surrounded by monitors and machines, but he was awake, alert, and when he saw her, his face lit up. Elena! His voice was still rough, unpracticed, but filled with joy. She sat beside his bed, taking his hand. How are you feeling? Everything is so loud, he said, wondering in his eyes. The machines beep, the hallway echoes. Dad's footsteps sound like thunder. He smiled. It's scary, but amazing. Elena's heart swelled. You're so brave. No, Ethan shook his head. You're brave. You saved me. Before Elena could respond, a nurse knocked and entered, followed by two people Elena didn't recognize. A man and woman in expensive suits, carrying briefcases. Mr. Corleone asked us to speak with you, the woman said to Elena. I'm attorney Jennifer Walsh. This is my colleague, David Chen. We're representing Mr. Corleone in a potential medical malpractice case. Elena's stomach dropped. I don't understand. We need your full account of everything you observed regarding Ethan's condition, Jennifer said, pulling out a recorder. Everything you saw, heard, and did. It's crucial evidence. For the next hour, Elena recounted every detail of Ethan's pain, the visible creature in his ear, the doctors who never looked closely enough. The attorneys listened intently, occasionally exchanging meaningful glances. When she finished, Jennifer leaned back. Miss Elena, what you've described suggests something far worse than negligence. What do you mean? David spoke up, his voice grave. Deliberate medical fraud. If doctors knowingly ignore a treatable condition to maintain a long-term patient relationship and the income that comes with it, that's criminal. Elena felt sick. You think they knew? We think it's possible, Jennifer said carefully. Mr. Corleone has requested a full audit of every medical record, every test result, every treatment plan from the past decade. If there's evidence of fraud, we'll find it. The next morning, Daniel received the lab report on the creature. He read it 3 times, his blood turning colder with each pass. The insect was a species known to medical science, rare but documented. It was the kind of parasite that could be detected with proper examination, the kind that showed up on scans if someone actually looked, the kind that, if left untreated, would cause permanent hearing loss over time. But if removed early, full recovery was possible. Daniel's hands shook as he held the report. Every doctor he'd hired would have known this. Every specialist would have been trained to recognize it. They didn't miss it. They ignored it. His son had been a cash cow, a perpetual patient, a guaranteed income stream, and they'd stolen 10 years of his childhood to maintain it. Daniel stood in the hospital corridor, the report crumpled in his fist, and made a decision that would shake the entire medical establishment. He pulled out his phone and called his head of PR. "Schedule a press conference," he said, his voice like steel. "Tomorrow morning, I'm going to expose every single person who profited from my son's suffering." "Sir," his PR director hesitated, "that's going to create enormous backlash. The hospital, the doctors, they'll fight back hard." "Let them try," Daniel said coldly. "I'm done playing nice with people who torture children for money." He hung up and turned to find Elena standing behind him, having heard everything. "Are you sure about this?" she asked quietly. "They'll come after you." "I know," Daniel nodded, "but I have something they don't." "What's that?" He looked toward Ethan's room, where his son was actually laughing at something on TV, hearing it for the first time. "The truth," Daniel said simply, "and a witness who cared more about a child than about her paycheck." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "I'm going to need you to stand with me tomorrow," Daniel said. "Tell your story publicly. It won't be easy." Elena thought of Samuel, of every child who'd suffered because medicine became about profit instead of healing. "I'll do it," she said firmly. Daniel extended his hand. Elena shook it. And in that moment, an unlikely alliance was forged between a billionaire and a maid, united by a simple truth. Some things matter more than money. And one of them is a child's chance to hear the world. The press conference was set for 10 a.m. at the Four Seasons Hotel downtown. By 9:30, the ballroom was packed with journalists, cameras, and curious onlookers who'd heard whispers of a major scandal. Daniel stood backstage, adjusting his tie for the 3rd time. His hands, usually so steady in boardrooms and negotiations, trembled slightly. Elena stood beside him in a simple blue dress, the nicest thing she owned, her heart hammered against her ribs. "You don't have to do this," Daniel said quietly. "I can tell the story myself." Elena shook her head. "Samuel's story deserves to be told, and so does Ethan's. I'm ready." Before Daniel could respond, his phone buzzed. A text from his lead attorney. "Daniel, don't go out there. Dr. Morrison's lawyers just sent this." An attachment followed. Daniel opened it, and his blood ran cold. It was a document stamped official, horrifying. Elena watched his face drain of color. "What is it?" Daniel's voice came out strangled. "It's a contract between the hospital and my insurance company." His hands shook as he read aloud. "Patient TE847, Ethan Thompson Corleone, approved for long-term care management. Projected value $6.2 million over 10 years. Treatment plan to maintain chronic condition for maximum reimbursement eligibility." Elena's hand flew to her mouth. "They planned it?" "They sold him," Daniel whispered, his eyes filling with rage and tears. "My son was a line item, a revenue stream. They kept him deaf on purpose because healing him would end the money." The door burst open. Dr. Morrison himself stood there, flanked by 2 security guards and a lawyer. "Daniel, please," Morrison said urgently. "Don't do this press conference. We can settle quietly. Name your price." Daniel's head snapped up, his eyes blazing. "My price? You want to know my price? We'll offer full reimbursement plus damages. You stole my son's childhood," Daniel roared, stepping forward. "You kept him in silence for profit, and you think I want money?" Morrison's lawyer stepped in. "Mr. Corleone, if you go public with accusations, we'll be forced to discredit your witness." He glanced at Elena with cold eyes. "A maid with no medical training who performed an unauthorized procedure? We'll paint her as reckless, dangerous. By the time we're done, she'll be lucky to avoid prison." Elena's blood turned to ice. Daniel moved between them, and Elena like a shield. You threaten her, you threaten me, and trust me, doctor, you don't want that fight. This will destroy the hospital, Morrison pleaded, his composure cracking. Hundreds of jobs, research programs, charitable work is all gone because of one mistake. One mistake. Daniel's voice shook the room. You turned my son into a profit center for a decade. An assistant knocked frantically. Mr. Corleone, they're ready for you. Daniel looked at Elena. Last chance to walk away. Elena thought of Samuel's grave, of Ethan's first word, of every child who'd ever been failed by a system that valued money over mercy. I'm not going anywhere, she said firmly. Together, they walked onto the stage. The camera flashes were blinding. Questions shouted from every direction. Daniel stepped to the microphone, the damning contract in his hand. 10 years ago, he began, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. My son was born deaf. I was told it was permanent, untreatable. I paid millions for specialists who promised they were doing everything possible. He held up the contract. This document proves they were lying. The room erupted. Journalists surged forward. Cameras zoomed in. My son was kept sick intentionally, Daniel continued, his voice rising, because a healthy child doesn't generate revenue. A suffering child does. And the medical establishment I trusted turned his pain into profit. He gestured to Elena. This woman, a maid with no medical degree, did what 8 years of specialists couldn't. She looked at my son with compassion instead of greed. She saw a creature living in his ear that every scan, every examination somehow missed. And in 5 minutes, she gave him back his hearing. Elena stepped forward, her voice quiet but clear. I did it because I lost my brother to the same system, because I couldn't watch another child suffer when I knew I could help, because some things like a child's right to hear the world should never have a price tag. The questions came like bullets. Are you suing the hospital? Will criminal charges be filed? How many other patients might be affected? Daniel held up his hand for silence. I'm not just suing, I'm exposing. Every doctor, every administrator, every insurance executive who profited from my son's suffering will be investigated. And I'm establishing a foundation-free medical care for every child with hearing problems, regardless of their family's wealth. Because what happened to Ethan should never happen again. The ballroom exploded with noise, some supportive, some hostile, all shocked. Backstage, Dr. Morrison watched on a monitor, his career disintegrating in real time. And in a hospital room across the city, Ethan watched his father on TV, tears streaming down his face, hearing every single word. For the first time in his life, he understood what his father's love sounded like. When power meets truth, everything changes. Comment below if you think Daniel did the right thing, and don't forget to subscribe to Unbroken Truths, because this story is far from over. The backlash came swiftly and viciously. Within 24 hours of the press conference, Elena's face was everywhere, news channels, social media, tabloid covers. But she wasn't being called a hero. She was being called a criminal. Rogue Maid performs illegal surgery on deaf child, screamed one headline. Unqualified woman endangers millionaire son, read another. The hospital's legal team launched a full-scale assault. They released statements calling Elena's actions reckless endangerment and unauthorized medical practice. They produced expert witnesses who claimed she could have killed Ethan. They demanded her arrest. Elena sat in Daniel's legal office, watching her life unraveling on every screen. They're saying I assaulted him, she whispered, her voice hollow. I inserted the creature myself to frame the doctors. Daniel's attorney, Jennifer, looked grim. They're playing dirty. The medical board has opened an investigation. The district attorney is under pressure to file charges. This is insane. Daniel slammed his fist on the table. She saved my son. I know that, Jennifer said carefully, but legally she performed a medical procedure without a license. That's a crime, regardless of the outcome. Elena felt the walls closing in. Her phone had been flooded with death threats. Her apartment had been vandalized. News vans camped outside, cameras following her everywhere. But worse than all of that, she hadn't been allowed to see Ethan in 3 days. They're saying I'm a danger to him, she said, tears streaming down her face. The boy I saved, I can't even see him. Daniel's jaw clenched. This is temporary. We'll fight this. Will we? Elena looked at him with hollow eyes. You're a billionaire with unlimited resources. I'm a maid with nothing. The moment this hurts your reputation, you'll walk away. Everyone does. That's not true. Isn't it? Alina stood abruptly. Your lawyers are already preparing distance strategies. I heard them in the hallway. They want you to cut ties with me publicly to save yourself. Daniel's silence was damning. Elena nodded slowly, understanding. I don't blame you. You have a son to protect, a company, a legacy. Her voice cracked. But I have nothing left to lose, so maybe it's better if I just disappear. Elena, wait. But she was already walking toward the door. That night, Alina sat alone in her tiny apartment, surrounded by moving boxes. She'd decided to leave the city, go somewhere no one knew her name, start over if that was even possible. Her phone buzzed. Another threatening message. You'll pay for what you did, you lying. She turned it off, unable to read more. A knock at the door made her jump. She opened it to find Mrs. Chen, the head housekeeper from the mansion, standing there with a stern expression. Pack faster, Mrs. Chen said flatly. Mr. Corleone is moving you to a safe house tonight. The reporters found your address. Elena shook her head. I can't keep accepting his help. It's making things worse for him. Then you're a fool, Mrs. Chen said sharply. That man has spent every waking hour fighting for you. He's hired 6 law firms. He's threatening to pull funding from every hospital in the state. He's turned his entire life upside down because he believes in you. And Ethan? Elena's voice broke. How is he? Mrs. Chen's expression softened slightly. Heartbroken. He keeps asking when you're coming back. He won't eat. Barely speaks. Just sit by the window, waiting. The words shattered Elena completely. She sank onto her couch, sobbing. I wanted to help him, she cried. That's all I wanted. And now I've destroyed everything. For both of us. Mrs. Chen sat beside her, something the usually formal woman had never done. My daughter was sick once, she said quietly. The doctors said she needed surgery we couldn't afford. A nurse, someone who didn't have to pay for it herself, saved my daughter's life and lost her job for violating hospital policy. Elena looked up, tears streaming. 20 years later, Mrs. Chen continued, my daughter is a doctor herself. And that nurse, she never regretted it, not once, because some things matter more than rules, more than careers, more than what people say about you. But what if I lose? Elena whispered. Then you lose having done the right thing, Mrs. Chen said firmly. That's still better than winning by doing nothing. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Daniel sat in Ethan's room, watching his son stare out the window. She's not coming back, is she? Ethan asked, his new voice filled with old sadness. Daniel's heart broke. I'm trying, son. I'm fighting for her. They're saying she hurt me, Ethan turned to face him, tears in his eyes. On TV, they say she's bad. But she's not, Dad. She's the only person who ever really saw me. I know. Then why can't you fix it? Ethan's voice rose with desperation. You fix everything. You're rich. You're powerful. Why can't you fix this? Daniel had no answer. For the first time in his life, money and power weren't enough. Because sometimes, he finally said, his voice breaking, the right thing is the hardest thing, and people who profit from wrong things will fight to protect them. Ethan wiped his eyes. Elena wouldn't give up on me, so I won't give up on her. The simple declaration from his 10-year-old son hit Daniel like a hammer. His phone rang. Jennifer, his attorney. Daniel, the DA is filing charges tomorrow morning. Elena will be arrested for practicing medicine without a license and child endangerment. I'm sorry, we're out of time. Daniel closed his eyes. Everything was falling apart. But as he looked at his son, at the boy who could now hear birds singing, rain falling, laughter echoing, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would burn down his entire empire before he let Elena pay for saving his son. The war was far from over. Sometimes doing the right thing costs everything. Drop a comment if you've ever had to choose between what's right and what's safe. The morning Elena was supposed to be arrested, something unexpected happened. Daniel woke to his phone exploding with notifications. Not threats this time. Something else entirely. A video had gone viral overnight, 50 million views and climbing. He clicked play and his breath caught. It was Ethan. His son sat in front of a camera, wearing his favorite blue shirt, his expression serious beyond his years. My name is Ethan Corleone, he said clearly, his voice still impractical but strong. 3 weeks ago, I couldn't hear anything. I couldn't talk. I lived in silence my whole life. The camera zoomed closer on his face. Everyone says Elena hurt me. They say she's dangerous. They want to put her in jail. Ethan's eyes filled with tears, but his voice remained steady. But that's a lie. Elena didn't hurt me. She saved me. He held up a drawing of a picture of himself and Elena, holding hands with sound waves drawn around them in rainbow colors. The doctors my dad paid millions of dollars to? They never really looked at me. They did tests and surgeries, but they never saw me. Elena saw me. She saw I was in pain, and she cared enough to help when everyone else looked away. Ethan's voice cracked with emotion. If you put her in jail, you're telling every kid like me that people who care don't matter. Those rules are more important than saving someone, and that's not the world I want to live in. He leaned closer to the camera. Elena gave me the greatest gift anyone ever gave me. She gave me a sound. She gave me my dad's voice. She gave me music, laughter, rain, birds, and everything beautiful I'd been missing. Tears streamed down his face. So if you want to arrest someone for that, then you should arrest me too, because I'd rather be in jail with someone who cared than be free in a world where caring is a crime. The video ended. Daniel sat frozen, his heart swelling with pride and breaking with pain all at once. Within an hour, the video had sparked a movement. A Stand with Elena trended worldwide. Parents of deaf children shared their own stories of medical neglect. Nurses and doctors came forward anonymously, exposing how hospitals prioritized profit over patients. Celebrity advocates amplified the message. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, holding signs, "Compassion is not a crime," and "She saved a child." At the district attorney's office, DA Margaret Foster watched the video for the third time, her expression troubled. Her assistant knocked. "Ma'am, the phones haven't stopped ringing. People are demanding we drop the charges. The governor's office said they're concerned about public perception." Margaret sighed heavily. "What does the evidence actually show?" "Technically, unauthorized medical practice. But the outcome was objectively positive. The child suffered no harm and regained his hearing. And the hospital's conduct," he hesitated. "It's looking worse by the hour." Margaret leaned back in her chair. 20 years as a prosecutor had taught her to follow the law, but this case felt different. "Get Elena's attorney on the phone," she said finally, "and Daniel Corleone. I want to meet with all parties, privately." 2 hours later, they sat in a conference room: Daniel, Elena, Jennifer, the attorney, Dr. Morrison's legal team, hospital administrators, and DA Foster. The tension was suffocating. DA Foster spoke first. "Let me be clear. I could prosecute Miss Elena. The law was broken, but prosecuting someone for saving a child's life while ignoring systemic medical fraud, that's not justice, that's political theater." Dr. Morrison's lawyer started to object, but Foster silenced him with a look. "However," she continued, "Miss Elena cannot simply walk away from this without consequences. The medical community needs assurance that untrained individuals won't perform procedures, regardless of good intentions." Elena's heart sank. She'd known this was coming. "So here's my proposal," Foster said, sliding documents across the table. "Miss Elena will complete certified medical assistant training and receive proper supervision credentials. In exchange, charges will be dropped and her record expunged." Elena blinked, surprised. "That's it?" "That's it," Foster confirmed. Then she turned to the hospital representatives, her expression hardening. "As for you, my office will be launching a full criminal investigation into medical fraud, insurance conspiracy, and patient abuse. I suggest you cooperate fully." Morrison went pale. His lawyer began frantically whispering. "And one more thing," DA Foster added, looking directly at Daniel. "Mr. Corleone, you mentioned establishing a foundation. I'd like to help, officially. Make sure what happened to your son never happens to another child." Daniel's throat tightened with emotion. "I'd be honored." Foster stood, signaling the meeting was over. "Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about making sure the right thing becomes the easier thing to do." Outside the courthouse, the crowd was still chanting. When Elena and Daniel emerged together, the roar was deafening. Elena stood at the microphone, trembling. "I'm not a hero," she said quietly, her voice amplified across the plaza. "I'm just someone who couldn't look away. We all have that choice every single day to see suffering and care, or to see suffering and turn away because it's easier." She paused, tears streaming down her face. "My brother Samuel taught me that. Ethan reminded me, and all of you, she gestured to the crowd. You're proving that compassion still matters, that it's not naive or foolish to care. It's the most powerful thing we can do. The crowd erupted in applause. Daniel stepped forward, his voice strong. The Ethan Corleone Foundation launches today. Free hearing care for every child who needs it. No insurance required, no bills, no child will ever be kept sick for profit again. More cheers. The camera flashes, hope spreading like wildfire, and in the crowd, unnoticed by most, stood Mrs. Chen, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, smiling. That evening, back at the mansion, Elena finally was allowed to see Ethan. She walked into his room nervously. He sat on his bed, and when he saw her, his whole face transformed. Elena! He jumped up and ran to her, throwing his arms around her waist. She knelt down, hugging him tightly, both of them crying. I saw your video, she whispered. You were so brave. I learned from you, Ethan said, pulling back to look at her. You taught me that being brave means doing what's right, even when it's scary. Elena's heart overflowed. I'm so proud of you. Are you staying? Ethan asked hopefully. Please say you're staying. Elena looked up at Daniel, who stood in the doorway, watching them with soft eyes. If your father will have me, she said quietly. Daniel smiled, a real, genuine smile. Elena, you're not staff anymore. You're family. For as long as you want to stay. Ethan cheered, hugging her again, and for the first time in weeks, the darkness lifted. The impossible had happened. Truth had defeated power. Compassion had triumphed over greed, and a family broken and unlikely had found each other in the ruins. The light always finds a way through the darkness. Comment below what this story taught you, and make sure you're subscribed to Unbroken Truths. 6 months later, the courtroom was packed for the final verdict. Dr. Morrison and 4 hospital administrators sat at the defendant's table, their faces ashen. Behind them, federal investigators had uncovered something far worse than anyone imagined. Over 200 children had been kept in managed care programs, their treatable conditions deliberately prolonged for profit. Judge Catherine Reynolds read the verdict with cold precision. On charges of medical fraud, conspiracy to defraud insurance companies, and child endangerment, guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted. Parents who'd lost years with their suffering children wept openly. Reporters scrambled to capture every moment. Dr. Morrison, Judge Reynolds continued, her voice cutting through the noise. You took an oath to heal. Instead, you turned children into commodities. This court sentences you to 15 years in federal prison and revocation of your medical license permanently. Morrison collapsed in his chair. The other administrators received similar sentences. The hospital's entire executive board was forced to resign, and the insurance companies involved faced billions in fines and restitution. Outside the courthouse, Daniel stood with Elena and Ethan, facing a wall of cameras. Justice was served today, Daniel said firmly, but our work isn't finished. The Ethan Corleone Foundation has already helped 847 children regain their hearing. We've opened 12 clinics nationwide, and we're just getting started. A reporter called out, Miss Elena, you've completed your medical training. What's next for you? Elena smiled, holding Ethan's hand. I'm the Foundation's Director of Patient Care. I train staff to do what I did to actually see patients, not as income sources, but as human beings who deserve compassion. And Ethan, another reporter asked, how does it feel to hear your father's voice every day now? Ethan grinned, looking up at Daniel. It sounds like home, he said simply. Daniel's eyes glistened. He pulled his son close. That evening at the Foundation's headquarters, they held a celebration. The walls were covered with photos of children smiling, families reunited, lives transformed. Elena stood by the window, watching the city lights, when Daniel approached. You know, he said quietly, a year ago I thought money could solve anything. That power was the only currency that mattered. Elena turned to him. And now? Now I know the most powerful thing in the world is someone who cares when they don't have to. He smiled. You changed everything, Elena. Not just for Ethan, for me too. We changed each other, Elena replied softly. You learned to listen. I learned that one person speaking up can move mountains. From across the room, Ethan called out, Dad! Elena, come see! They walked over to find him pointing at a news broadcast. The anchor was reporting on copycat foundations opening across the country, all inspired by their story. children's hospitals implementing new oversight protocols, medical boards creating patient advocacy positions. "Look what we started," Ethan said, his voice filled with wonder. Daniel knelt beside his son. "No, buddy. Look what you started." "Your video changed everything." Ethan shook his head. "Alina saved me. You fought for her. We all did it together." And that was the truest thing anyone had said. Late that night, after everyone had gone home, Alina stood in the foundation's main hall, looking at a plaque on the wall. "In memory of Samuel Rodriguez, whose silence taught us to listen, whose loss taught us to care, and whose legacy lives on in every child we save." She touched the plaque gently, tears streaming down her face. "We did it, Samuel," she whispered. "We made sure no other child suffers like you did." Behind her, soft footsteps approached. Ethan stood there in his pajamas, having snuck back with Daniel. "Is that your brother?" Ethan asked quietly. Alina nodded, unable to speak. Ethan walked forward and touched the plaque too. "Thank you, Samuel," he said simply. "Because of you, Alina saved me, and now we're saving others." Daniel placed his hands on both their shoulders, and the three of them stood together in the quiet hall, a family forged not by blood, but by sacrifice, courage, and love. The impossible had become possible. The silenced had found their voice, and the world was listening. Sometimes the smallest act of courage creates the biggest change. Don't miss the beautiful ending. 1 year later. The sun rose over the newly built Corleone Foundation Children's Center, a gleaming facility where children from every background received free medical care. The waiting room was filled not with silence, but with laughter. Elena walked through the halls in her white coat, now officially certified as a medical advocate. Children waved at her, parents thanked her, and she smiled a smile that finally reached her eyes. In the main auditorium, a special ceremony was about to begin. Ethan stood on stage, now 11 years old, his voice confident and clear. He was presenting awards to medical professionals who'd gone above and beyond for their patients. "My dad always says money builds buildings," Ethan said into the microphone, "but people build hope. And today, we honor people who chose hope." The crowd applauded as doctors, nurses, and advocates received recognition not for profit, but for compassion. When the ceremony ended, Ethan ran to Alina and Daniel, who stood together in the back. "How'd I do?" he asked eagerly. "Perfect," Alina said, hugging him. "Your brother Samuel would be so proud." "Our brother," Ethan corrected gently, and Alina's heart melted. Daniel watched them with quiet joy. His phone buzzed, another hospital requesting partnership with the foundation, another family thanking them for saving their child. But he put the phone away. Some moments were too precious to interrupt. That evening, the three of them sat in the mansion's garden, the same garden where this all began. The fountain bubbled peacefully, birds sang their evening songs, and the world felt right. "Elena," Daniel said suddenly, "I never properly thanked you." "You thank me every day," she replied, smiling. "Not for Ethan," he clarified. "For me. You showed me that I'd become someone who valued control over connection, money over meaning. You gave me my humanity back." Alina's eyes glistened. "And you gave me a purpose bigger than my pain. We saved each other." Ethan looked up from the flower he was examining. "Are we always going to be together, like a real family?" Daniel and Alina exchanged glances, both tearing up. "Always," they said in unison. Ethan grinned, then ran off to chase fireflies that had begun to appear in the twilight. "He's happy," Alina whispered, watching him. "He's living," Daniel corrected. "Really living, because of you." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Ethan play, his laughter ringing out clear and beautiful, a sound that would never be taken for granted again. 3 years later, the Ethan Corleone Foundation had expanded to 17 countries. Over 12,000 children had received life-changing care. Medical schools now require compassion training inspired by Elena's story, and legislation had passed protecting patients from predatory medical practices. But the real victory was simpler. It was in Ethan's laughter as he played piano, hearing every note he created. It was in Elena's peace as she helped her 100th child hear their mother's voice for the first time. It was in Daniel's transformation from a man who bought solutions to a man who built them with his own hands. One evening, a young mother approached Alina at the foundation, holding her deaf daughter. "They said she'd never hear," the mother cried. "But I heard about you, about what you did. Can you help her?" Elena knelt down, looked at the little girl's frightened eyes, and smiled. "Let me see," she said gently, pulling out her examination light. And as she looked into the child's ear with the same care she'd shown Ethan years ago, she felt Samuel's presence, proud, peaceful, finally at rest. Because his suffering hadn't been in vain. It had sparked a revolution of compassion that would echo through generations. Dear friends of Unbroken Truths, sometimes the world tells us to stay in our lane, to mind our business, to let experts handle everything. But Elena's story teaches us something powerful. Expertise without compassion is just another form of cruelty. She wasn't a doctor, she wasn't trained, she wasn't qualified by the world's standards, but she had something more important. She had eyes that actually saw and a heart that refused to look away. And that changed everything. If you've ever felt small, powerless, or unqualified to make a difference, remember this: the most powerful thing you possess isn't your resume. It's your willingness to care when everyone else walks by. Daniel learned that money can't buy what matters most. Ethan learned that his voice, once silenced, could move mountains. And Elena learned that honoring the dead means fighting for the living. What will you learn from their story? Drop a comment below and tell me, what's one thing you're going to do differently after hearing this? Who will you see more clearly? Whose pain will you refuse to ignore? And if this story touched your soul the way it touched mine, please hit that like button, subscribe to Unbroken Truths, and share this video with someone who needs to remember that compassion is the most powerful force in the universe. Because somewhere right now there's another child waiting for someone to truly see them, another person suffering while systems profit, another family losing hope. Be their Elena, be their voice, be their miracle. Thank you for being part of this community. Thank you for caring. Thank you for believing that one person can change the world, because you can, and you will. Until next time, keep seeking truth, keep breaking silence, and keep loving courageously. This is Unbroken Truths, reminding you, the most beautiful sound in the world is someone saying, "I see you, and I won't look away."